Jake and Marcus were both 32. Both earned $80,000 a year, and both had $70,000 sitting in savings after renting the same three-bedroom apartment in the same mid-sized city for years. Jake decided to buy. Marcus decided to keep renting and invest the difference instead. Neither of them knew, at the time, which decision would actually turn out better. And the honest answer, 20 years later, wasn't the clean victory either side of this argument usually promises. My name is Emory, and if you've ever watched a video that confidently declared renting a waste of money, or one that confidently declared buying a trap, and walked away more certain than the actual math supports, then this video should help fill in the parts both sides tend to leave out. And if that's useful to you, sticking around and subscribing helps this channel keep running the complete numbers instead of the version that fits neatly on a thumbnail. Most people think this comparison comes down to whichever monthly payment looks smaller. They're completely wrong, and the reason matters because the real comparison requires accounting for closing costs, mortgage interest in the early years, property tax growth, maintenance that doesn't show up in a budget until it does, and the number almost nobody calculates honestly. What happens if the renter actually invests the money they're not spending on a mortgage? Here's how the numbers actually looked for Jake and Marcus. A comfortable home in their city listed at $350,000. Jake put his full $70,000 down, exactly 20%, avoiding private mortgage insurance, and took a 30-year loan at 7% interest. His principal and interest payment came to $1,863 a month. Adding property taxes of $350, insurance at $150, and a maintenance reserve of $290, roughly 1% of the home's value annually, his true monthly cost of ownership came to $2,653. Marcus signed another lease at $2,000 a month, invested his $70,000 in a broad market index fund, and invested the $653 monthly difference between what Jake paid and what he paid. Here's the part almost never said out loud in this comparison. The moment Jake signed at closing, he wasn't ahead, he was behind, and not by a small amount. Closing costs on a home this size typically run 2 to 5% of the purchase price, covering lender fees, title insurance, and prepaid taxes, meaning Jake's real day-one cost was closer to $82,000 to $88,000, not $70,000. That gap has to be recovered before buying starts outperforming renting at all, and it's a cost the industry rarely leads with, because it makes the first year look worse than the ending photo ever does. This connects directly to something the homeownership side of this debate consistently glosses over. In year one of a 30-year mortgage at 7%, the vast majority of every payment is interest, not equity. Of Jake's $1,863 monthly payment, roughly $1,633 went to the lender as interest in month one, and only $230 reduced the loan balance. Jake was paying $2,623 a month in interest, taxes, insurance, and maintenance, with almost none of it building equity. Marcus was paying $2,000 a month in rent. The phrase, throwing money away on rent, survives because it sounds true, but in year one, Jake was arguably throwing away more. By year three, Jake had paid roughly $95,500 total, with only about $8,300 going toward actual principal. His remaining mortgage balance sat near $271,700, and with the home appreciating 3 to 4% annually, its value had grown to somewhere between $383,000 and $396,000, putting his equity between $111,000 and $124,000. That's real wealth, but it's wealth locked inside a house he can't access without selling and paying 5 to 6% in commissions on the way out. Over the same 3 years, Marcus had paid $72,000 in rent, while his invested $70,000 had grown to roughly $93,000, and his monthly contributions had added another $27,000, bringing his total liquid wealth to approximately $120,000. At year three, Marcus was slightly ahead in liquid net worth, though Jake had more on paper, wealth he couldn't spend without selling the house or borrowing against it. Someone might reasonably ask about the costs that rarely make it into the buying side of this conversation at all. When Jake eventually sells, he'll pay a seller's commission of 5 to 6%, meaning on a $500,000 sale, $25,000 to $30,000 leaves his pocket at closing. Combined with what he paid going in, His total transaction drag over a full buy and sell cycle often runs 8 to 10% of the home's value. A hurdle appreciation has to clear before the investment genuinely outperforms. Property taxes also grow with assessed value, meaning Jake's costs quietly rise even as his mortgage payment stays fixed, while Marcus's landlord absorbs that same tax exposure. And maintenance isn't always the budgeted $290 a month. Some years look like caulk and light bulbs. Other years look like $9,000 roofs or $4,000 foundation repairs. Costs that are guaranteed over a long enough timeline, even when they don't announce themselves in advance. There's one more number that almost never appears in home ownership calculations at all: opportunity cost. The moment Jake wired his $70,000 to closing, that money left the market entirely. At a typical long-term index fund return, that same $70,000 would have grown to somewhere near $470,000 over 20 years. That isn't money Jake lost. It's the alternative outcome he traded for home equity, and the comparison is only honest if both sides of that trade get counted. Here's where this gets genuinely interesting, because the story shifts meaningfully by year 10. Jake's home was worth approximately $483,000 to $500,000, with a remaining mortgage balance near $246,000, putting his equity between $237,000 and $254,000, after roughly $30,000 to $40,000 spent on maintenance and repairs along the way. Marcus's original $70,000 had grown to approximately $181,000, and his monthly contributions, which had gradually shrunk as his rent climbed toward $2,690 a month, had added another $110,000, bringing his total to roughly $291,000. Marcus was still ahead on liquid net worth, but something had shifted. His rent was now nearly as expensive as Jake's fixed mortgage payment, with nothing building underneath it, and Jake's payment had 20 more years left at that same fixed number while Marcus's rent kept climbing. By year 20, Jake's home was worth roughly $670,000 to $700,000, with equity between $482,000 and $512,000, after spending $55,000 to $75,000 on maintenance across 2 decades. His housing cost had stayed anchored near that original payment, even as everything around him grew more expensive. Marcus's portfolio had grown to roughly $550,000 to $580,000, assuming he'd held through every market downturn without selling, but his rent had climbed to roughly $3,600 a month, and his monthly contributions had shrunk as more of his income went towards simply keeping a roof over his head. At this point, Marcus was still slightly ahead on total net worth, but Jake had something Marcus didn't. In 10 more years, his mortgage would be gone entirely. By year 30, Jake owned his home outright, worth somewhere between $850,000 and $950,000, with his monthly housing cost dropping to just taxes, insurance, and maintenance, roughly $900 to $1,100 a month. Marcus, meanwhile, was still paying rent, by then climbed to somewhere between $4,700 and $5,000 a month, with no asset underneath it and no ceiling on how much further it could rise. Someone might reasonably ask what makes the renting and investing side of this actually work in practice, since the math assumes something that's genuinely hard to sustain. The honest answer is that this entire strategy only performs as described if the difference actually gets invested every single month, including the months when the market drops significantly and every instinct says to hold cash instead. The data on whether people actually do this consistently isn't encouraging. Many renters spend the gap rather than invest it, upgrading their lifestyle as their bank balance grows rather than automating it away. Buying enforces savings automatically through the mortgage payment itself, a kind of forced discipline that no spreadsheet fully captures, and it's part of why homeownership tends to produce more wealth for average people than the theoretical numbers alone would predict. It's equally honest to say the break-even timeline on buying is longer than most people expect. Once closing costs, selling costs, and the interest-heavy early years of a mortgage are all accounted for, buying typically doesn't outperform renting and investing until somewhere around year 5 to 7 in a normal market. And someone who buys and sells within 3 years has a very real chance of coming out behind compared to simply renting the whole time. There's also concentration risk worth naming honestly. A homeowner's largest asset sits in one building, on one street, in one local market, while a renter's portfolio is spread across thousands of companies and dozens of sectors. a meaningful difference if a specific local market stagnates or declines the way some regional markets have. And liquidity matters more than it seems until it's needed. Since a homeowner can't sell 5% of a house to cover an emergency, the way an investor can sell a portion of a portfolio on any business day. So the honest answer to renting versus buying isn't the same answer for everyone. Buying tends to win clearly when someone plans to stay at least 7 to 10 years, when the local price-to-rent ratio sits below 20, or when local appreciation consistently runs above the national average, since leverage through a mortgage can accelerate wealth faster than an equivalent portfolio position. Renting tends to win clearly when someone might move within 3 to 5 years, when the local price-to-rent ratio sits above 25, or when career mobility itself carries real economic value that a fixed mortgage would work against. And in either case, the single most important question isn't which option wins on average. It's how long someone actually plans to stay, and whether they'll genuinely invest the difference if they choose to rent, because the math only plays out the way it's modeled if the plan is actually followed, not simply intended. The math doesn't reward assuming either side of this debate is automatically correct, and it doesn't punish someone for choosing based on stability or flexibility, even when the numbers lean slightly the other way. It simply rewards running the actual numbers for a specific city, a specific timeline, and a specific plan, rather than repeating a rule that was never built to apply to everyone equally.